My name is Elena M. Brooks. I'm 34 years old. And the moment I understood that my family did not see me as a daughter, a sister, or even a person with a life of her own, was the moment my brother sent me a text that read like an eviction notice written in reverse. Not a question, not a request, not even the kind of half-begging, half-guilting message my family usually used when they wanted something from me. Just a statement. Elena, we're moving in on Friday. Mom already agreed. Clean out the guest room. I stared at my phone for a full minute, the screen glowing in the dark while my brain tried to catch up with the sheer nerve of what I was reading. We're moving in, not can we stay for a bit. Not do you mind helping us out. Not even the fake polite version of manipulation my family usually dressed things up in before asking me to sacrifice something. Just a declaration, like my house was already his, and I was the last person to be informed. I sat up in bed and read it again. Then I scrolled up through our message history, partly to make sure I wasn't losing my mind, partly because context matters when someone suddenly decides your life is available for takeover. The last message before that had been 3 months earlier, when my brother borrowed my SUV and brought it back with an empty tank and a fresh dent in the side panel he swore had already been there. Before that, 6 months back, when he asked for money for car repairs, and then posted Instagram stories from a casino 2 days later with chips in his hand and a stupid grin on his face. And now suddenly, and he was moving in, with who? That was my first real thought. Because if Mason said we, it never meant just him. It meant everyone he had dragged into his latest bad decision. It meant his girlfriend, probably her bags, probably more chaos than square footage, probably children if the story had evolved since the last time I forced myself to care. It meant promises made without permission. It meant my address being offered to people like it belonged to him. I knew exactly how he operated. He lived like consequences were temporary and other people's resources were public utilities. If he said we, what he really meant was, I have made a mess, and now I'm bringing it to your doorstep, because I assume your life is flexible enough to absorb it. I called him. It rang once, twice. Voicemail. I called again. Same thing. For the third time he picked up. Music was blasting in the background. I could hear laughter, clinking glasses, somebody shouting over a TV. Yo, what's up, Elena? What the hell is that text? What text? He sounded genuinely confused, which somehow made it worse, like he had sent it, forgotten it, and moved on with his night. Like telling someone you were taking over their house belonged on the same level as reminding them to pick up milk. The one about moving into my house. On Friday, this Friday. Oh yeah, he said, like I had reminded him about dinner plans. Crazy, right? Me and Sophie need a place for a few months. Mom said your guest room's just sitting there anyway. I gripped the phone harder. Mom said? Yeah, she told me you'd be cool with it. I never talked to Mom about this. Well, she said she'd talk to you. I don't know, Elena. Point is, we need somewhere to land and you've got space. It's family. You're not gonna say no. There it was, that word, family. The battering ram they had used my whole life, whenever they needed me to sacrifice something so they would not have to deal with the consequences of their own decisions. When Dad needed someone to co-sign a loan because his credit was wrecked. Family. When my sister, back when she still spoke to any of us without drama, needed free babysitting every weekend because she deserved a break. Family. When Mason crashed his first car and wanted somebody to lie to the insurance company. Family. And now apparently, family meant I was supposed to hand over part of my house because he had decided on a fresh start. Nobody asked me to finance. Mason, I said, forcing my voice down into something calm. But I'm not running a halfway house. Wow, harsh. We just need like 3 months, he said. 4 tops, maybe 6 if Sophie's job thing doesn't work out. 3 to 6 months. The kind of lie people tell when they're already mentally unpacked. We're getting back on our feet, he added. Fresh start, you know how it is. No, I did not know how it is. Because when I needed a fresh start at 23, nobody offered me a guest room. I slept in my car for 2 months and worked double shifts until I could afford a studio apartment with roaches in the cabinets and a bathroom door that didn't close all the way. I learned what starting over looked like when nobody treated me like an emergency they had to solve. So no, I did not know how it is to casually assume someone else should rearrange their life because you ran out of options. You can't just move into my house, I said. Why not? You live alone, you've got space, and Mom already said. Mom doesn't live here. She doesn't get to make that decision. Silence. Then his voice changed. Not louder, just uglier. Are you seriously doing this right now, after everything? I actually laughed once under my breath. After everything? What does that even mean? You know what it means. We're family. You help family. That was when I realized this was not a misunderstanding. He genuinely believed he was entitled to my home because he shared DNA with me, and because our mother had probably encouraged that delusion. I'll call you back, I said, and hung up before he could turn it into a shouting match. My phone lit up almost immediately. Mom, Kyle, no, Mason, says you're being difficult. He just needs help. Don't be selfish. And Mason, whatever, man. We'll figure it out. Thanks for nothing, Dad. Your mother's upset. Call her. I turned the phone face down on the bed and sat there in the dark, thinking about the house I bought 3 years ago. Not inherited, not gifted, bought. With money I saved working 60-hour weeks as a project manager for a commercial construction firm. With a down payment I scraped together by eating cheap food, saying no to vacations, and never buying anything that didn't matter. With a mortgage I paid every month on time by myself. Mine, every inch of it. The so-called guest room my brother wanted was my home office. My desk was in there, my files, my second monitor, the room where I worked from home twice a week and sometimes sat late into the night finishing reports, while the rest of the house stayed quiet. But to him, as it was just sitting there, to my mother it was unused space. To both of them, my life was raw material for their convenience. I got out of bed, went downstairs, and made coffee at midnight like an insane person. Then I opened my laptop and started making a list. Not a list of reasons to say no. A list of what I needed to do to make sure no actually meant something. Because I knew my family. I knew a boundary to them was just the opening move in a negotiation. I knew a locked door was not a final answer. It was a challenge. And if I wanted to protect what I built, words were not going to be enough. By 2 o'clock in the morning, I had a plan. And for the first time since that text hit my phone, I was no longer shocked. I was ready. The next morning, I stopped treating it like a family disagreement and started treating it like a security problem. That shift changed everything. I called my home security company before I even finished my coffee. Hi, I need to upgrade my system, I said. Full perimeter coverage, cameras, motion sensors, window sensors, door sensors, the works. The guy on the phone sounded way too cheerful for 9 o'clock in the morning. Planning a trip? Something like that. He chuckled. We can get a tech out tomorrow afternoon. Perfect. My next call was to Caleb Mercer. Caleb was a friend from work, the kind of man who knew building codes, lease language, and every possible loophole in property law the way some people know baseball stats. We had worked together on a few commercial projects. And if there was one person I trusted to tell me exactly how ugly this could get, it was him. Hypothetical question, I said when he answered. If someone tries to move into your house without permission, what's the legal move? He laughed immediately. That's not hypothetical, that's trespassing. What if they're family? Still trespassing. What if they claim they had permission? Did you give it? No. Then they didn't have it. And if they try to get in anyway, you call the cops. Blood relation does not give somebody property rights. I leaned back in my chair and let that sink in. It should have been obvious. But when your whole family has spent years acting like your boundaries are emotional problems instead of actual boundaries, hearing someone state it that plainly feels almost revolutionary. Oh, you want me to draft something official? Caleb asked. Cease and desist. Looks legal, sounds scary. Good first step. Maybe, I said. Let me see how Friday plays out first. He made a low sound like he already knew the answer. This sounds like a story. It is. I'll buy the beer when it's over. When I hung up, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Not exactly. I was alert, focused. There is something strangely calming about reaching the point where you stop hoping people will do the right thing and start preparing for what they will actually do. Wednesday afternoon, the security tech showed up. Nice guy, mid-40s, calm eyes, the kind of person who had definitely seen things and learned not to ask unnecessary questions. So, he said, glancing around as he unpacked his tools. Bess, you want cameras at every entry point? Every single one. Front door, back door, garage, side entrance, first floor windows. Yes. He looked at me for a second. You expecting trouble? I gave him a small smile. Let's call it preventative maintenance. That made him grin. I like your style. It took 4 hours. By the time he left, my house felt less like a home and more like a well-defended border. 4 exterior cameras, motion sensors, window alarms, a control panel by the front door with a code only I knew, a phone app that let me see everything in real time. The doorbell camera was my favorite. Crisp video, night vision, 2-way audio. I could see exactly who was at my door and talk to them without ever opening it. All set, he said, handing me a folder. If a sensor trips, you get an alert. If the alarm goes off, the system verifies and contacts law enforcement. Premium package, full response. Perfect. After he left, I tested everything. Front door open, alert. Back door open, alert. Arm the system, open the door again, and the alarm screamed through the house so loud it nearly rattled my teeth. My phone lit up with notifications. I disarmed it and stood there in the quiet afterward, feeling something almost ridiculous. Satisfaction. Then I did something petty. I went into the doorbell settings and enabled the greeting feature. Now anyone who walked up to my porch would hear a pre-recorded message. I stood there for a minute thinking about what I wanted those first words to be. Something short, polite, crystal clear, so I recorded it. Hi, you've reached a private residence. If you do not have an appointment, please leave. Smile. You're on camera. I played it back twice and smiled to myself. Thursday morning, my mother called. I let it go to voicemail. She left me a 3-minute message that somehow managed to sound offended, disappointed, and morally superior all at once. It started with, "I cannot believe how difficult you are being," and ended with, "Family is supposed to stick together." No mention of asking me, no mention of consent, no acknowledgement that the house in question was mine. Just frustration that I was not cooperating with the script. I deleted it. Then Mason texted, "So you're really going to do this? Make us homeless?" Homeless. As if he was not still in an apartment at that very moment. As if Sophie did not have relatives. As if his failure to plan had somehow transformed into my moral emergency. I did not respond. Instead, I texted Caleb back. I need the cease and desist." His laugh came fast. "Knew it. Can you make it official? Legal letterhead, clean wording, enough attitude to make them sweat?" "Exactly. Done. I'll have it to you by morning. Who's it going to?" "My brother and my mother." There was a pause. "Your mother?" "She's the one who told him he could move in without asking me." Caleb let out a low whistle. "Family drama," he said. "My favorite kind when it's happening to somebody else." Friday morning, I woke up at 6 o'clock, printed 2 copies of the cease and desist on the nicest paper I owned, and read through them carefully. The wording was beautiful, cold, precise, clear enough that even my family would have to work to pretend they misunderstood. Our unauthorized entry into or occupation of this property without express written permission from the owner constitutes trespassing under state law. Any attempt to enter, remain on, or claim residence at this address will result in immediate contact with law enforcement. This property is monitored by active security surveillance. All unauthorized activity will be recorded and documented. I put both copies into envelopes and left them by the door. Then I checked my phone. The Ring app showed everything quiet. No movement, no alerts. I armed the system, grabbed my bag, and left the house. But I did not go to work. I drove 3 blocks away to a coffee shop, ordered the biggest cold brew they sold, sat near the window, opened my laptop, and waited. Because according to Mason, they were moving in today. And if there was one thing I knew about entitled people, it was this. They always think confidence can substitute for permission. I wanted a front row seat when reality corrected that assumption. At 10:47 a.m., my phone buzzed with the alert I had been waiting for. Motion detected at front door. I opened the Ring app immediately, and there they were. Mason standing on my porch like he owned it, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. Sophie beside him with 2 overstuffed suitcases, and behind them, parked like a statement, a U-Haul truck taking up half my driveway. They had not come to ask. They had come to take. Mason reached for the doorbell and pressed it, and right on cue, my pre-recorded message played through the speaker. "Hi, you've reached a private residence. If you do not have an appointment, please leave. Smile, you're on camera. He looked up at the camera, squinting like he was trying to process whether this was real, then gave a lazy wave. Yo, it's me. Open up. I tapped the audio button. Mason. You're not welcome here. Leave. He stepped back like I had physically shoved him. What the hell, Elena? We drove 3 hours. I told you no, I said. You ignored me. Now you're trespassing. He actually laughed like I had said something ridiculous. Trespassing? This is family. This is my house, I said, keeping my voice steady. And you don't have permission to be here. Sophie stepped forward then, arms crossed, chin lifted like she had been rehearsing this in the car. This is insane. Your mom said... My mom doesn't own this house, I cut in. I do. You have 10 seconds to leave before I call the police. Mason's face shifted, red creeping up his neck. You're not serious. 10. He pulled out his phone, typing fast. Probably running straight back to mom like this was some misunderstanding she could fix. 8. Sophie grabbed his arm. Mason, let's just go. No, he snapped, shaking her off. 6. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. What is wrong with you? Let them in. 4. Mason grabbed the door handle and tried to turn it. Locked. He jiggled it harder, then started pounding on the door like force alone would change the answer. Open the door. 2. I tapped the alert on the app. The alarm exploded through the house and out into the street. Loud, shrill, impossible to ignore. My phone lit up instantly. Alert, alarm triggered. Law enforcement has been notified. I leaned back in my chair at the coffee shop, lifted my cup, and took a slow sip, like I had all the time in the world. Because in that moment, I did. For once, I was not reacting. I was watching. The police arrived in 6 minutes. And I watched the whole thing through my phone like it was a live feed I had set up for myself. Mason was still yelling at the door when the patrol car pulled up. Sophie had backed off to the sidewalk, phone pressed to her ear, pacing. 2 officers stepped out, one older, one younger, both with the kind of expressions that said they had seen this exact situation more times than they cared to count. Sir, step away from the door, the older officer said. Mason turned around, frustration boiling over. Finally, this is my sister's house. She locked us out. Your sister's house? The officer asked. Yeah, we're moving in. She said we could. I almost smiled. The officer tilted his head slightly. She said you could? Well, our mom said she could, Mason corrected. Like that made it better. That's not the same thing, the officer said flatly. Where I closed my laptop, paid for my coffee, and headed back to my house. Watching was one thing. Being there for the ending was another. When I pulled into my driveway, the scene had shifted. Mason and Sophie were standing on the sidewalk now, the U-Haul still blocking part of the street. A neighbor across the way watching through her window. I got out of my car and walked up calmly. Afternoon, I said, nodding at the officers. I'm the homeowner. The older officer turned toward me. You triggered the alarm. The system did, I said. But yes. Mason stepped forward immediately. See? This is my sister. Tell them this is a misunderstanding. I didn't even look at him. I looked at the officer. It's not. They showed up without permission, tried to enter, and refused to leave when told. That's not what happened, Mason snapped. Well, I have video, I said, already pulling out my phone. Doorbell camera, audio, and video, time-stamped. The younger officer nodded. Let's see it. I played the footage. Mason on the porch, the message, the warning, his hand on the door, the pounding, the refusal. The older officer watched without interrupting, then looked back at Mason. That's trespassing. Mason's mouth opened, then closed. But she's my sister. And it's her property, the officer replied. She told you to leave. You didn't. That's trespassing. Sophie's voice broke then. We drove 3 hours. We don't have anywhere else to go. The officer's expression softened just a fraction. Ma'am, I understand, but that doesn't give you the right to enter someone else's home. She turned to me. Can you just talk to him? He's your brother. I held her gaze. Tits, I already did. The officer looked back at me. Do you want to press charges? Everything went quiet. Mason's face lost color. Elena, come on. For a second, I thought about it. About pushing it all the way. About forcing consequences that could not be talked away at the next holiday dinner. But I also saw the chain reaction that would follow. court dates, family dividing into sides, years of noise. Not today, I said. But if they come back, I will. The officer nodded. Fair enough, you both need to leave, now. Do not return to this property without permission. If you do, you will be arrested. Mason didn't argue this time. He couldn't. The performance had collapsed. There was no audience left to convince. They got in the truck and drove away. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just anger trailing behind them like exhaust. The older officer handed me a card. If they come back, call this number, reference the incident. We'll have it on file. I will. They left, and the street slowly returned to normal, like nothing had happened. But something had, because for the first time in my life, I had said no, and it had actually meant something. After the police left and the street settled back into its usual quiet, I stood in my driveway for a moment longer than necessary, just letting it sink in that they had actually tried it. Not hinted, not asked, not negotiated, tried to take. And still, I knew that was not the end of it. With people like my family, you don't get one attempt. You get waves. My phone confirmed that within minutes. Calls, texts, missed notifications stacking one on top of another like pressure building. I didn't answer any of them. I didn't need to hear the script. I already knew it. Disappointment, guilt, family, sacrifice. The same words rearranged into slightly different shapes. About an hour later, my doorbell rang again. I didn't move toward the door. I pulled up the Ring app. Mom, standing on my porch in her church clothes, holding a casserole dish like she was about to walk into Sunday dinner instead of the aftermath of a failed forced entry. The normalcy of it was almost impressive, like she believed presentation alone could reset reality. I tapped the audio. Mom, now is not a good time. She looked directly into the camera, her expression tightening the second she realized she wasn't going to get the door. Open the door, Elena. We need to talk. There's nothing to talk about, her jaw set. You called the police on your brother. There's plenty to talk about. He tried to break into my house. He was trying to move in like I told him he could. I let out a breath, slow and controlled. You don't get to make that decision. Her face changed then. Not dramatically, just enough. The softness dropped. The authority stepped forward. I'm your mother, she said. Open this door. That sentence used to work on me, not because it made sense, because it was reinforced over years. A shortcut to compliance, a command wrapped in identity. But standing there, looking at her through a camera instead of from inside the same emotional space, it sounded different. It sounded like entitlement. No, I said. She blinked. Excuse me? No, I repeated. You don't have permission to be here. You need to leave. She stared at the camera like she had just heard something impossible. Like I had broken a rule she didn't know could be broken. I am not leaving until we talk about this, she said, her voice dropping into that cold tone I recognized from childhood, the one that meant consequences. I tapped the alarm button lightly, letting the system chime just enough to make the point. Oh, now that's the alarm, I said. If you don't leave, I will activate it. She stepped back slightly, instinctively, eyes flicking toward the door like she expected it to respond to her. You wouldn't. I just called the police on Mason, I said. Try me. For a moment, something real flickered across her face. Not anger, not control, something closer to confusion. What happened to you? She asked quietly. You used to be such a good daughter. There it was. Good, obedient, available, easy to use. I grew up, I said. The silence stretched between us. Then she set the casserole down on the porch harder than necessary, the lid rattling against the dish, like even that small act needed to carry weight. Fine, she said. But don't come crying to me when you need something. I won't. She stood there 1 second longer like she expected me to change my mind at the last second. I didn't. She turned, walked back to her car, drove away. And just like that, the house was quiet again. I didn't open the door right away. I let the casserole sit there, visible through the camera feed, like some kind of offering I had refused. It stayed there for an hour. Then I opened the door, picked it up without looking inside, and dropped it straight into the trash. No hesitation, no curiosity, no guilt. The rest of the afternoon passed without interruption. No more visitors, no more attempts. Just silence settling into the walls, the kind that feels earned. I ordered pizza, sat on my couch, I watched something mindless just to give my brain a break from the constant calculation of what might happen next. And for the first time in days, I slept. Not lightly, not half alert. Fully, no phone in my hand. No tension in my shoulders. No part of me waiting for the next knock. The next morning, I woke up to 27 notifications. Texts, voicemails, messages from relatives I hadn't spoken to in months, some in years. The network had activated. Aunt Denise, I'm praying for you both, Cousin Jenna. Calling the police on family is low, Uncle Rob. Your mom is devastated. Call her. Grandma's sister. What is going on? Your mother won't stop crying. I scrolled through all of them, read every word, and then archived every single message without responding. Because this wasn't about misunderstanding. It never was. And they had already decided who I was in this situation, and for once, I wasn't going to argue with their version. I was going to live mine. Around noon, the doorbell rang again. I didn't even say hi this time. I just opened the app, already expecting escalation, already knowing they wouldn't stop at one attempt. What I didn't expect was how many of them would show up at once. Mason, Mom, Dad, Aunt Denise, and standing slightly off to the side, a woman I didn't recognize, dressed in a blazer and holding a clipboard like she was about to walk into a meeting. They had brought reinforcements. Of course they had. I tapped the audio. Mason, I told you not to come back. Mom stepped forward immediately, positioning herself in front like she was leading something official. We're not leaving until you talk to us. Oh, watch me, I said. Dad cleared his throat, that familiar tone he used when he thought he was about to take control of a situation. Elena, this has gone too far. We brought someone to help us work through this. He gestured to the woman with the clipboard. She stepped forward with a professional smile that did not reach her eyes. Hi, Elena. My name is Sharon Wells. I'm a family counselor. I'm here to help facilitate a productive conversation so everyone can feel heard. I stared at the screen for a second. A mediator. They had brought a mediator to my house without asking me, without permission, without even understanding how insane that was. I didn't agree to mediation, I said. Sharon kept smiling like she had practiced it in a mirror. Sometimes people don't realize they need help communicating. And that's where I come in. There's no communication problem, I said. I said no. They ignored it. End of story. Mom's voice cracked slightly, shifting tactics again. Please, Elena, just 10 minutes. That's all we're asking. No. Mason threw his hands up. This is ridiculous. All this over a stupid room. It's not about the room, I said. It's about respect. Something you've never given me. Respect, he snapped. You called the cops on me. You tried to break into my house. Dad stepped forward, trying to smooth it over. Everyone calm down. This is exactly why we need to talk face to face. We're not doing this, I said. I paused. Then I counted. 10. Sharon's smile faltered for the first time. 8. Mom started crying, real tears this time. 6. Dad's expression hardened. You're making a mistake. 4. Mason muttered something under his breath. 2. They didn't move, not one step. So I dialed. 911, what's your emergency? I have multiple trespassers on my property refusing to leave, I said calmly. There was a prior incident yesterday. They were warned not to return. I gave the address. Units are on the way. Stay inside. I hung up. Then I looked straight into the camera. Police are coming, I said. You have 3 minutes to leave before they arrive and arrest all of you. That's when it broke. Not all at once, in pieces. Sharon stepped back first, the professional mask dropping as reality finally caught up to her. I think I should go. Good call, I said. She turned and walked quickly to her car, leaving the family behind without another word. Aunt Denise grabbed Mom's arm. We need to go. No, Mom said, shaking her off. She's bluffing. Aunt Denise shook her head. Look at her, she's not bluffing. Dad stared at the camera, jaw tight. You'd really do this to your own family? You did this, I said. I set a boundary. You crossed it. In the distance, faint but unmistakable sirens. Mason heard them. We all did. Dad grabbed his arm. Come on. And just like that, the whole group unraveled. No speeches, no final words. They scattered. Cars starting, doors slamming. 3 different directions. By the time the police pulled up, my driveway was empty, same officers as before. The older one looked at me and shook his head slightly. Back again? They brought a mediator this time, I said. He blinked. A what? A family counselor showed up uninvited. He looked at his partner, then back at me. Quick, you want that restraining order now? I didn't answer right away. I thought about the last 24 hours. The texts, the pressure, the casserole, the first attempt, the second attempt, the fact that they weren't slowing down. They were escalating. Yeah, I said finally. I do. He nodded once. Smart. After they left, I went back inside and sat on my couch. No TV, no music, just silence. And I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even stressed. I was clear, because for the first time in my life, I hadn't been. Not for guilt, not for pressure, not for family. I had drawn a line, and I had enforced it. And whether they understood it or not, they had finally heard it. The 2 weeks before the hearing were quiet in a way that didn't feel peaceful so much as suspended, like everything had paused to gather itself before the final move. And I used that time the only way I knew how, organizing everything into something that couldn't be argued with. Dates, timestamps, footage, messages, incident reports. The group chat screenshots Caleb had sent me where they were literally discussing ways to get into my house when I wasn't home. It all went into one folder, structured, labeled, clean. The emotional weight stripped away and replaced with facts, because I knew that was the only language that would matter in a courtroom. The morning of the hearing, I got there early, sat on a bench outside the courtroom with the folder in my lap, flipping through it one more time, even though I didn't need to. More out of habit than doubt. And when they arrived, all of them together, Mom, Dad, Mason, and a lawyer who looked like he had already decided this wasn't worth the effort, I didn't feel what I expected to feel. No anger, no panic, just distance. Like I was watching something I had already lived through and no longer belonged to. When we were called in, everything moved quickly, the judge flipping through the file, asking questions in a tone that didn't leave room for performance. And when their lawyer tried to frame it as a misunderstanding, as a family dispute that had escalated, I watched the judge's expression stay exactly the same as she turned the page and landed on the evidence that mattered. The footage, the messages, the planning, the repeated violations. And when she asked Mason about the message suggesting they enter my home when I wasn't there, he didn't have an answer that could survive the room. And when she asked my mother if she had told him he could move in, the silence that followed said more than anything she could have explained. It didn't take long. I'm granting the permanent restraining order, she said, her voice steady, final. And in that moment, everything that had been noise for weeks collapsed into something clear. 500 feet. No contact. No third-party contact. No social media. No exceptions. The words landed one after another like locks clicking into place. And when my mother started crying, asking how she could be kept from her own daughter, the judge didn't soften, didn't adjust, didn't accommodate. She simply stated what should have been obvious from the beginning. That family does not override the law. That repeated violations and escalation come with consequences. And that what had happened here wasn't misunderstanding. It was boundary breaking. When it was over, they didn't approach me. They couldn't. The bailiff stood between us, the distance already enforced. And for a second, my mother just looked at me like she was trying to find something familiar in my face, something she could still claim. And then she turned away. I walked out of the courthouse into the parking lot and stood there for a moment, letting the air hit my face, letting the silence settle in without interruption. And Caleb, who had shown up without telling me, leaned against my car with a small smile. How'd it go? It's done, I said. He nodded like that was enough, like he understood what done meant in a way most people wouldn't. And when he said congratulations, it didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like acknowledgement. When I got home, everything looked the same driveway, the same porch, the same door that had been tested and held. But it felt different, not lighter in a dramatic way, just settled, like something that had been moving for a long time had finally stopped. I went inside, disarmed the system, set my keys down, and made coffee without thinking about who might show up or what message might come through next. And that was when I realized what had actually changed. Not them. Me. The 2 weeks before the hearing were quiet in a way that didn't feel peaceful so much as suspended, like everything had paused to gather itself before the final move. And I used that time the only way I knew how, organizing everything into something that couldn't be argued with: dates, timestamps, footage, messages, incident reports. The group chat screenshots Caleb had sent me where they were literally discussing ways to get into my house when I wasn't home. It all went into one folder, structured, labeled, clean. The emotional weight stripped away and replaced with facts, because I knew that was the only language that would matter in a courtroom. The morning of the hearing, I got there early, sat on a bench outside the courtroom with the folder in my lap, flipping through it one more time, even though I didn't need to. More out of habit than doubt. And when they arrived, all of them together, Mom, Dad, Mason, and a lawyer who looked like he had already decided this wasn't worth the effort, I didn't feel what I expected to feel. No anger, no panic, just distance. Like I was watching something I had already lived through and no longer belonged to. When we were called in, everything moved quickly, the judge flipping through the file, asking questions in a tone that didn't leave room for performance. And when their lawyer tried to frame it as a misunderstanding, as a family dispute that had escalated, I watched the judge's expression stay exactly the same as she turned the page and landed on the evidence that mattered: the footage, the messages, the planning, the repeated violations. And when she asked Mason about the message suggesting they enter my home when I wasn't there, he didn't have an answer that could survive the room. And when she asked my mother if she had told him he could move in, the silence that followed said more than anything she could have explained. It didn't take long. "I'm granting the permanent restraining order," she said, her voice steady, final. And in that moment, everything that had been noise for weeks collapsed into something clear. 500 feet. No contact. No third-party contact. No social media. No exceptions. The words landed one after another like locks clicking into place. And when my mother started crying, asking how she could be kept from her own daughter, the judge didn't soften, didn't adjust, didn't accommodate. She simply stated what should have been obvious from the beginning: that family does not override the law, that repeated violations and escalation come with consequences, and that what had happened here wasn't misunderstanding. It was boundary breaking. When it was over, they didn't approach me. They couldn't. The bailiff stood between us, the distance already enforced. And for a second, my mother just looked at me like she was trying to find something familiar in my face, something she could still claim. And then she turned away. I walked out of the courthouse into the parking lot and stood there for a moment, letting the air hit my face, letting the silence settle in without interruption. And Caleb, who had shown up without telling me, leaned against my car with a small smile. "How'd it go?" "It's done," I said. He nodded like that was enough, like he understood what done meant in a way most people wouldn't. And when he said congratulations, it didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like acknowledgement. When I got home, everything looked the same driveway, the same porch, the same door that had been tested and held. But it felt different, not lighter in a dramatic way, just settled, like something that had been moving for a long time had finally stopped. I went inside, disarmed the system, set my keys down, and made coffee without thinking about who might show up or what message might come through next. And that was when I realized what had actually changed. Not them. Me. 3 months later, a letter showed up in my mailbox, handwritten, from Rachel. Inside was a photo of her family, smiling, normal, untouched by everything that had happened. And on the back, she had written one sentence: "You were right. Boundaries aren't cruel, they're necessary." I put the photo on my fridge, not where family used to be, but next to the things that had stayed. A recipe Mrs. Chen had given me after bringing over dumplings one night. A postcard from Caleb. A photo from a work event where nobody expected anything from me except that I show up as myself. My phone buzzed. A message from Mrs. Chen. "Dinner Sunday. I'm making pot stickers." I smiled, typed back, "I'll be there." Then I looked around my house, at the cameras, the locks, the system I had built to protect something that was mine, and then realized I didn't feel like I needed them the same way anymore, but I kept them anyway. Because the point was never just keeping people out. It was knowing I could, and for the first time in my life, that felt like freedom, I used to think family was supposed to feel inevitable, like weather, like gravity, like something you couldn't argue with, only survive. That if the people you loved hurt you, the mature thing was to absorb it quietly and call that grace. That if someone shared your blood, they automatically got more access, more forgiveness, more chances. But what I learned standing in my own driveway, watching police remove my brother from the fantasy he had built in his head, was this. Access is not love, entitlement is not closeness, and family is not defined by how much of yourself you are willing to surrender. And for most of my life, my role had been simple: be useful, be flexible, be easy. Be the one who makes things work when other people fail to plan. Be the one who gives up space, time, money, peace, privacy, comfort. Be the one who understands. Be the one who doesn't make it worse. That role is seductive because it comes dressed as goodness. It sounds noble, it feels mature, it gets rewarded, just enough to keep you in it. But over time, usefulness becomes invisibility. And invisibility becomes permission. Permission for other people to treat your life like overflow storage for their bad choices. The hardest part wasn't saying no. The hardest part was understanding that once I said it, I had to mean it all the way through. No softening because they cried. No revisions because they brought casseroles. And no bending because they used words like mother and brother as if titles alone erased behavior. The real shift happened the moment I stopped measuring my choices against their feelings and started measuring them against reality. Reality said, I own the house. Reality said, they did not ask. Reality said, they escalated, repeatedly. Reality said, if I gave in once, I would spend the next year, maybe the next decade, trying to claw my own life back out from under people who had already proven they would take whatever I left unguarded. So I did what they never expected me to do. I stopped negotiating. I stopped translating my boundaries into softer language, so they would find them easier to swallow. I stopped explaining obvious things to people who only ask questions as a delay tactic. And once I did that, everything got simpler. Not easier, clearer. There is a difference. Clear means you know where you stand. Clear means the guilt still knocks, but it doesn't get inside. Clear means when someone says, you'd really do this to your own family? Your mind no longer scrambles for a defense because you understand the truth. They did it first. All you did was refuse to continue participating. That is what they couldn't handle, not the police, not the cameras, not the hearing. What broke them was the collapse of the assumption that I would always bend. Because people who rely on your softness for their survival panic when it becomes structure. And maybe that is the part no one talks about enough. Boundaries do not just protect you, they expose people. The second you enforce one, everybody reveals exactly who they thought you were allowed to be. My mother revealed that she thought motherhood gave her permanent override authority. My brother revealed that he mistook shared history for property access. My father revealed that his version of peace required my compliance. The relatives revealed how quickly they would choose comfort over truth. And I revealed something to myself I should have known much earlier. I was never hard to love. I was just surrounded by people who only understood love as access and control. That is not the same thing. These days, my house is quiet in a way that doesn't feel lonely. It feels deliberate. There is coffee in the mornings, work calls in the office I never cleared out, dinner with people who knock first, texts from people who ask instead of assume, the occasional delivery package I actually ordered myself. No surprise visitors. No emotional ambushes disguised as concern. No unspoken expectation that my life exists to absorb the overflow of someone else's wreckage. And maybe the strangest part of all of it is this. I don't miss them the way I thought I would. I miss the version of family I kept hoping would appear if I just explained myself one more time. Gave a little more, waited a little longer, proved my love more clearly. But I don't miss the reality. I don't miss the entitlement. I don't miss the pressure. I don't miss the feeling that every nice thing I built would eventually be measured for how much of it someone else thought they deserved. That kind of relief is hard to explain to people who have never had to fight for the right to keep what's theirs. But if you know, you know. And if you've ever had someone stand in your doorway and act like your life was communal property, if you've ever heard family used as a threat instead of a comfort, If you've ever been told that protecting your peace was cruelty simply because it inconvenienced people who benefited from your silence, then you understand, you know that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is stop answering the door. Not because you're cold, because you finally learned how to be loyal to the person who has had to live with every consequence. You. My name is Elena M. Brooks. I was told I was selfish for not turning my house into a rescue center for people who never respected me. I was told I was cruel for calling the police when my own brother tried to force his way into my life. And I was told I was breaking the family apart by refusing to let them keep using me. Maybe I did. Maybe the family they wanted only worked if I stayed small enough to be useful, but the life I built did not survive because I kept the peace. It survived because I finally chose myself. And if that makes me difficult in their story, I can live with that. Because in mine, it makes me free.